Something about your love, something about your love changes everything, changes everything. Something about your love, something about your love changes everything, changes everything. Something about your love, something about your love changes everything, changes everything. Something about your love, something about your love changes everything. You turn my morning into dancing. 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 'Cause your love changes everything. Your love changes everything. You turn my morning into dancing. You turn my morning into dancing. You turn my morning into dancing. 'Cause your love changes everything. Your love changes everything. Oh, there's something about your love, something about your love changes everything in my body. Oh, something about your love, something about your love changes everything. It changes everything. Something about your love, something about your love changes everything. It changes everything. Something about your love, something about your love changes everything, changes everything. Something about your love, something about your love changes everything. Something about your love, something about your love changes everything, changes everything. Something about your love, something about your love changes everything, changes everything. Something about your love, something about your love changes everything. You turn my morning into dancing. 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 Something about your love, something about your love changes everything.
Good morning, Rooted Men. Very nice to be with you this morning. I'm super excited. I'm looking at 10 people already online, and it looks like a good crowd. I'm excited. We have Chuck B with us again, and Ken Gooch, the two regulars here, and of course the regular of the regulars. That's Bert Reggiani. Good morning, Bert. Chris Conley, Eric Vale. Oops, I got the wrong one. Eric, there you are. It was like one popped in just as I clicked on you, and so I got the second one. And we also have Brian Flaming. Good morning, Brian. And Rooted in Truth. I could have swore that a little screen popped up on my broadcast this morning, and it said Bapa, and I'm thinking, wow, that's crazy. But maybe I was just imagining it. Good morning, Glenn. Nice to see you. I love that picture. It's just the two of you. Okay. I thought there was a third person in there for a second. We had a great men's group last night, and it continued to be good all the way up to 24th Street. We had Israel's son with us, and he brought one of the kids, just like Ruth, that was at the orphanage years ago, and we all talked and laughed, and I may have got a new nickname, although I can't remember what it was. Israel's son said he understands now that my wife has got a lot of work on her hands, which I thought was really... yes, you're right, Glenn. I was seeing stuff. It looked like a face right between your heads on above looking down, but it's a small picture, so I it's okay. I get it. Sometimes I see things. Anyway, today's verse is from the book of Mark, verses 16 through 20. I always, when I do the ones that are in Mark and in Matthew and John and Luke, I like to look at the harmony just to get an idea if there's any difference in the scriptures. And there's sometimes it's very subtle, like today, there's not a whole lot different. But then some days there's quite a difference, which is cool. But then it's also neat to look at the differences. There was a writer that wrote a book called Cold Case Christianity years ago. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but he wrote a book called, he was a forensic investigator, and he wrote a book about, he investigated the Bible from a skeptic's point of view, using the same things he would use in a murder or crime investigation. And the story is fascinating. I don't know. I never read the book myself. I just read some of his videos, but the story is fascinating because he took the scriptures and we all know they're there, the little differences that, okay, like in today, they talked about putting a scarlet robe on him. And then in Mark, it says a purple robe. Skeptics and atheists will use that and say, see, this isn't real. But he said this is actually consistent with real testimony from eyewitnesses, that there will be small differences, that they will remember things just a little differently. And it's not unusual. In fact, if it was too perfect, he would be suspicious as a cop. And I thought that was fascinating. But that's nothing to do with today's study. I think I just thought that came to mind when I noticed that the minor inconsistencies there in the two scriptures. So let's get started with it. I'll pull it up here real quick. Yeah, that is. Hopefully that's big enough for you to see. It isn't for me on this little screen. The soldiers led Jesus away to a palace, that is the Praetorium, and called together the whole company of soldiers. They put a purple robe on him, then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on him. And they began to call out to him, "Hail, the King of Jews." Again and again, they struck him on the head with staff and spit on him. Falling on their knees, they paid homage to him. And when they had mocked him, they took off the purple robe and put on his own clothes on him. And then they led him out to crucify him. It's very short. It definitely didn't take too long to read through it. That's why I just wanted to go through it, because I just thought it would just quick get it out of the way so we could actually talk about the certain aspects of it. Now, the inconsistencies I talked about was the purple robe. They in Matthew, the only other version of this in the harmony, and it also says they put a staff in his hand. Now you in Mark, you understand why they took the staff and hit him with his own staff. And then in Mark, there was one issue that was talking about they told him to where is it? They spit on him too. It doesn't matter. I'm getting out of control here. Anyway, that so it's pretty similar, the two verses. Now, it says in the ESV they called it a battalion, which I thought was odd because that's like 600 troops. Would they need that many troops to lead them away? I thought that was odd. But then I thought I read this thing by a guy, and it fascinated me because he was questioning why Pilate allowed this to happen. If you know Roman law and Roman soldiers, boy, they followed orders or they died. I mean, that was it. So why would Pilate do this after thinking the guy was innocent and washing his hands of his crimes? Allow him to be tortured and beaten and spit on by an entire battalion of troops. The guy Red thought yesterday was that he was trying to show the Pharisees that this guy was no threat to him. This guy was not a criminal, and I think he was at that point trying to sway him a little bit and try to maybe see the point. Then another one I read was really fascinating was that if Jesus had defended himself and put up a good defense, there was some risk that Pilate would have had the church leaders up on those crosses. It's curious because Pilate wasn't known for being a nice guy. He was not a reasonable man. His historians say he was violent. He didn't mind killing innocent people along with guilty people. It was just he led with an iron fist. So why do we think he took the time in the individual minutes that he spent with the conversation with Jesus and basically knowing that the priests wanted him killed? Well, probably some of it was contempt for the Jews, right? I mean, because what did he do after that? He goes up and he puts up these robes and he puts the crown on him, and it's the plaque on the cross is King of the Jews. All those are kind of like a poke at the church leaders. You can see it. It's not. It didn't matter to Jesus. We know that, and it didn't really. But the Jewish people probably would have been bothered by these actions, especially the church leaders. It's an ugly thing. He's humiliated. He's beaten. He's spit on. And there's so many of these events I look at now as the trial in the Sanhedrin. It was a show. Now Pilate's putting on a show for the church leaders, poking them in the face, telling them, "This is your king." You wonder sometimes just why we do things and why people do things, and I never understood. We look at Jesus's reaction to the trial. He's questioning. He spoke silently. That was written in scriptures. It was definitely prophesied that this would happen. He would stand silent before his accusers. But that his reaction didn't make sense to anybody. I'm sure the Jewish leaders were aghast when he just stood there in this trial and didn't answer. I know they were bothered by his proclamation of being the Messiah, but he didn't really defend himself. And we know that Judas was tormented by his decision. There's so many people had these reactions to this. Pilate, here's a man that's known to be angry, violent, very ruthless leader. And yet he spent time actually trying to set Jesus free. In Matthew 27:19, it talks about Pilate's wife warning him to have nothing to do with this righteous man's death. anyway, and you just have to wonder that those words were in the back of his mind when he was talking to Jesus. And it's to me, it's a troubling, painful look at how people are. I mean, we've all had churches that rejected us or didn't make us feel welcome. Maybe might be more exact. I know some people take churches reject them, but sometimes they just like they don't really care if you're there or not. But we know that people can be difficult sometimes. They can push people aside. They can it's always a struggle to get them to the next step, to accept others. So what does this tell us about the scripture today? What can we learn from it as far as our lives in 2024 in America, where we don't have to hide our prayer yet, and we don't, we can openly proclaim Jesus as King. What does it tell us? What do we learn from this? Well, it tells us that things aren't always what they look like. Religious leaders aren't always religious leaders. Sometimes they're people hiding. They're trying to must be what's right. Oh, yeah. Okay, my Rumble just kicked me out. Also, but also our position. My position in the church, your position in the church, even the pastor's position in the church is never more important than the truth. And I think if there's any one lesson we can take from that's the one. We'd like to have our church exactly the way we like to have our church. And that's not necessarily how it should be. The truth has always got to be spoken, no matter whether people come or not. And that's hard for a lot of pastors. It's hard for a lot of churches and a lot of church folks. Oh, and the third thing we learn, always listen to your wife. That's the truth. That's for any women that are sneaking out there watching right now. And we know you're out there because it's like, let's see, there's 14 people online and 8 have commented. Okay, so now that I'm in trouble, I'm going to quit before I get in bigger trouble, because that seems to be what I do. Have a very, very wonderful day. I hope this was a blessing to you. Have a firmly rooted day, and may someone see Jesus in you. Oh, wait a minute. I got something here. Okay, I got that. I got rid of that. I got so much stuff on here. What is wrong with me? It's always a